Okay, so we are going to sit down and watch one of these kills from Limit. For anybody that does not know who Limit is one of the top rating guilds in World of Warcraft. They got World Second this time around, and it was a big deal because they were expected to get World First because that is a level of performance they are more than capable of. Didn't work out this time. So, big congrats to EU on taking it from NA. And, of course, Limit put up a good fight and got second in that race. World of Warcraft is in a rough state. It's in a point where, it's not always fun to talk about and to play. And for guilds that are at the top end, it's not always feeling like it's well supported in a way that justifies the amount of play that these full-time players are capable of. And Final Fantasy is in a state where it's coming off an incredibly healthy expansion, going into what looks to be a very exciting expansion. And it has a community that seems to be very welcoming of large WoW creators coming in. So there's very little risk if they want to come in and try it of getting backlash from their own community, of getting backlash from the 14 community. In general, it's been smoother than expected. There have been some bumps along the road, and we've talked about those. But in general, it has been very, very good at kind of bringing these people in. Svea, I understand, is going to be, his voice is going to be in this video as well. If you don't know who Svea is one of the top black mages, casters, top players, honestly, just in the world at Final Fantasy. And so Svea has kind of been, my understanding, is helping Limit along, at least to help kind of offset them just having to listen to large quantities of backseaters and get some real information only when they want it, is my understanding. So like they're wiping and then they're having a chance to kind of ask an expert questions. And I think that this video should be an interesting chance to kind of go back and listen to a review. I haven't gotten to listen to any of this footage yet. I haven't gotten to see any of their clears. I've been hearing about it all third hand, second hand, whatever the phrase is. And I think that the things that I'm looking for in this, and the reason you should care, is because, first of all, more eyeballs on the game is always good, of course. But Limit brings a production quality and a mentality that is not always well documented in Final Fantasy, while it may already exist among many of the top guilds. TPS, for example, taking World First, they don't even stream their stuff. And so outside of, interviews that we get through things like Mog Talk, we don't get to see this kind of live thought process on how World First progression works. And I think that there is a trickle down on how people can play, on the mentality among top end play, what you should feel like when there is wipe after wipe after wipe that's not your fault. And there is something to watching Limit raid that I look forward to seeing their thoughts comparing the two games, because usually when you're comparing the difficulties in both games, it's somebody who has played one difficulty in one game a long time ago and is playing the other difficulty currently. And so it is very rare that we have somebody that is playing at the absolute top end of progression in both games at the same time, that is also ready, willing, and able to put out their thoughts in an easy to digest way, where it would represent all the people who might be doing that but aren't sharing those in a YouTube or Twitch style format. So I look forward to this. I wanted to give some context up front because we have basically two world first capable players from these different games talking here, and like that's an incredibly interesting conversation entirely on its own.
Hey guys, second video in the boss review series. This is actually the last boss we're doing before going into the Savages, the Normals and Savages. Really the only purpose of doing it was just to have us learn the game a little bit before going into the Savage content. Interestingly enough, this one was much easier than the previous one. It was like 4 or 5 pulls or something like that. It was just because I think, well, first of all, we were just so much better than the game, not being, on our first day playing these characters. So our actual individual play was much higher, which leads to higher familiarity with the fights. But also this fight just had more intuitive mechanics to just a normal MMO way of thinking, where I think the previous one, Titania, had a lot more things that were very specific to Final Fantasy. So we kind of, it took a little bit longer to intake that information basically. But either way,
I do think that's one of the things that, when you see top end players, I have no doubt that top-end Final Fantasy players would be capable of being good at WoW, and I have no doubt that top-end WoW players would be capable of being good at 14, but you think about like, okay, well, they're just going to jump from Mythic ratings straight into the hardest fights, E12 Savage or something like that. And they're just going to jump straight into Ultimates, or the other way around, right? You're going to go straight from being World First in Ultimates, and we're going to dump you into a Mythic raid. And that really looks over the fact that oftentimes World First raiders are somebody who has been playing the game for many, many expansions. And so they have done dungeons, they have done normal modes, they have done extremes, previous Savages, prior to being a World First Raider, and alongside being a World First Raider. Many times the people who are getting World First place, this is not their first time progging a brand new Savage or Mythic fight. You know, they are somebody that is familiar with this. So you are seeing the end of a very, very long journey. And so it is very easy to say at the end, like, okay, cool, I want to go see them at the end of a different journey. And so we see them, you know, in some cases we have seen top-end players from one game jump over to another game and try jumping into the top end and then go, ugh, I don't even know what this is. And so I do think there is like a very real acknowledgement here of there's a lot of things in these extreme and savage fights that are communicated in a way where even if they're new mechanics to a Final Fantasy player, we oftentimes see World First Raiders learn very, very quickly what these mechanics are because they know the patterns of how these developers have communicated in the past. And somebody who simply walks in is not going to have that context.
Either way, really interesting conversation, and you guys just stick around and see it. Thanks. I think this was the pull we killed it. Yeah, it was. Okay, let me back it up. Okay, so this was our initial idea for this, which you probably saw, was we didn't know initially if it had to bounce. We thought it was like total distance traveled. So our first idea for a strat before we figured out the bounce thing was to maybe just send it across the room in a line so it like just went out its whole distance without ever having to bounce and staying in the middle. Our strat always revolved around making it easy on everyone else by making the two people make the angle correct so no one has to worry about it and everyone stay in the middle. As basically,
as somebody that simply watches, one of the things I've always admired about Limit is their ability to focus on thinking about other people. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially in World of Warcraft, when you're talking about one person being inconvenient compared to a very large number of people whose life is not inconvenient. I don't know how much of that'll stay intact now that you're looking at 8. So if you're inconveniencing 2 people, but you're losing 6, like what is that doing to total DPS output, depending on which 2 people are being inconvenienced. But one of the things that I've always really admired about Limit is that kind of, even when it's a self-responsibility, right? Somebody else drags a bomb into the party, wipes the raid, pulls over. Immediately, all of the raiders don't go, that was your fault. You know, and there can be some jokes and stuff going off, but the attitude, if you watch them for a prolonged period of time, is, what can I be doing better so that maybe they felt they had a better place to place that bomb? What can I be doing better so that we're not in that position in the first place? Can we push an earlier phase a little cleaner? And I think that's what allows them to see consistent definitions of progression over hundreds of pulls when, you know, progression doesn't always mean getting it to the lowest life. It can mean, hey, let's get an earlier phase out a lot cleaner. Let's get to this point cleaner. That is also really, really helpful. And it's something, that stamina is something that you don't see very often and is something that is incredibly common among World First Raiders.
We ended up doing it the bounce. I'm assuming that's what most, is there like another strat people use for that?
So there's uptime strats for that, which are pretty slick, where you have it go directly through the middle of the boss and then everyone stands on the flanks so that everybody can keep hitting it.
That's Svia's voice if you don't recognize it. When he does stream, he does have his face. It's just not showing here.
So if the melee gets targeted, they just stand in front. Because the way that those are...
Oh, I see.
You know the swords that spawn and tether to the player?
Yeah.
They spawn radially from the player. So if everyone stacks at the back, the 2 swords are going to spawn at the back of the room. And that's where that line is going to start. So you missed that, how that functioned, because it's randomly spawned, and you got there eventually after trying to figure out who it was going to be on, but you didn't determine where the sword starting location was going to be.
Okay.
What did you say about that? You could bait where they spawned, you said?
Yeah, so if you draw a line out from the center of the room through your character...
Oh, so is this isn't just max.
To the next gold circle, that's where it's going to spawn if you get selected.
So basically, if you all stacked up, they would just go through your character and they would both be stacked, right?
they can't be directly on top of each other, but they'll be right next to each other to the point where you could have the people who get marked just go to the other side of the boss from where those swords spawn.
And you get
then
way more uptime. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, way more uptime. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that's
But
that's
what people
cool.
typically did early on is just put them like left and right side of the boss at the far side of the wall, like you guys ended up doing, and then just duck in.
All right, cool. So one thing I found interesting about this boss is there's so much retrobation, like, or reprobation. Like, there's a bunch of winged ones too. Like winged reprobation is like, it's like there's 3 different versions of it, right?
Yeah, so sometimes they'll do that. They just give a lot of abilities similar names.
Okay.
Because it's all to do with, it's just boss theme, I guess.
Okay.
The thing
It's
that
so
I think
confusing
you
that they're
missed,
the same name.
yeah, it's meant to do that so that you aren't told exactly what's happening by the castbar name.
So one of the differences between World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy is, and it's something that's been a dialogue between the players and the devs over the years, right? Because they put out a fight, and then we try to clear the fight as players, and then they look at how we cleared it, and then they design the next fight. And so it's this back and forth conversation that we're having every single tier. And when we say we liked this tier or we didn't like this tier, and then they look at it and they say we liked this tier, we didn't like this tier, there's this back and forth of trying to move to a place where the devs feel that the tier worked out, the players love and rejoice the tier, everybody's happy, and we're all moving forward. Okay, well, how do we repeat that experience? And one of the big things that has developed in World of Warcraft is add-on support. And so with weak auras and deadly boss mods and things like that, you can have various callouts. And what that has allowed WoW to do is it has allowed them to design each and every boss fight as a totally unique freestanding thing if they so choose. It doesn't mean they don't reuse things, but it does mean they don't have to. They can literally have every single mechanic in a boss fight be brand freaking new looking because they don't need it to have consistent aesthetics. They don't need to have it have consistent naming conventions. It doesn't need to have consistent telegraphs or audio cues or anything, because if something is weird and unique to that fight, the world first progression raiders will learn it. It will get placed into an add-on so the general population is not hung up on that. So it becomes something that can challenge top-end players, and then everybody else gets to receive it just like every other form of content. Final Fantasy has never allowed add-on support. It doesn't mean there aren't add-ons. You can literally see a DPS meter right behind my face, right there. Like, the add-ons are there. But they aren't actively supported. They are not actively encouraged. They are technically against terms of service. And what that means is that puts the responsibility on the developers to communicate directly with us what a mechanic is doing. And that means if they don't want us to know what it is, they have to be opaque. And if they do want us to know what it is, they have to be very, very, very clear. And so, as a very narrative-based game, of course everything is heavy on theme, but you still see ground effects all look the same. Stack markers all look the same. So you still have all these indicators, and so there's all these patterns where, like, if they don't want us to know an ability, maybe they name the ability the same every single time, and there's a telegraph on the boss, or there's some indicator in the room or something like that that's going to tell us what that ability is doing different. And that's how they can be both clear and not yet telling us exactly what to do. Because they're having to follow this set of rules that they've established as a way of communicating with a player base that doesn't have add-ons to kind of fill in the gaps. I don't know that one is better or worse. It puts extra responsibility on the Final Fantasy devs to communicate, and it puts limitations on them so that if something is like, if we were fighting a really toxic boss, you can't just suddenly make all the ground effects like bubbling green goo. There still has to be these kind of orange markers. There still has to be the orange stack markers. You can't just change it up because that we don't know what that means. And you see them kind of messing with that in ARR. During A Realm Reborn, you see different ground effects look differently. But by the time you get into Shadowbringers, by the time you get into the current stuff, it's incredibly consistent. And that is because they have at this point started to build into that the ability to have support for people that have visual disabilities and things like that, so that people who are colorblind or in some cases literally blind can get this feedback. People who struggle with certain pattern recognition, they've accounted for all of that. And so in many cases you have both a visual and audio cue in some fights, so that people who are struggling to catch one have an opportunity at the other. They're not going to tell you what those are, but they are placed, and they are placed consistently, because they can't try to trick you too much.
So something you missed about the one that you saw before, which was the cone one, that goes out and then returns.
Yeah.
That's player baited as well. So you can determine where that goes to make.
I think we figured that out.
That spawn.
We thought it was on the. We thought it was on the tank. Was it not on the tank? Other players?
It's anyone.
Okay.
Any one random player. So if you stack for that, it makes the baiting of everything else so much easier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Being able to dictate where those are going to be.
Yeah. Okay. So Shadow Reavers, just raid damage. None of this stuff is interesting. Okay. The intermission.
I feel like we did that correctly.
Yeah. Well, let's see, because apparently Forgiven thing was mailing someone.
Yeah, it was mailing me, I think.
Yeah. You definitely learned your lesson from Mustard Seed here, though. You did it correctly, 100%.
And our only thought process was these Forgiven Venery, because there was two with the same name, that those were the two that need to be tanked. That I don't know if that logic is good, but that was just the thing that made sense to me.
They're the ones that do damage. Like a melee tanking the Forgiven Shame, the bird one, can just bloodbath and sustain through those autos.
Okay. Then we have
what people tend to do is bring them all in quite close together, and you can actually get some AoE off before they tether. But that's more of an optimization.
Yeah,
thing that
so
didn't really tend to happen.
interesting
about
about
we were
that.
starting to do that.
Yeah, we were starting to do it. So me and him, me and him like backed them up to the center to where they didn't have a DR on like one pull, so we could like AoE them a little bit. But then we were like, all right, fuck it, let's see, because if they have the same name, they can stack. And then after we stacked, we were like, oh, fuck it, we'll just spread them out, because like, who cares about this phase? Let's see what else we did.
But we could have had him like
I will say that uptime optimization strats are something that's developed later. If you go back as somebody who's trying to learn a fight and you watch a guide and you're like, okay, now I want to see if I can test myself. One of the logical thoughts you might have is, well, let me just go watch other people's pull and I'll see if I can call the fight without all the overlays and audio stuff that a guide is offering. So I studied the material, and now I'd like to use an actual run of the fight, like flashcards, to see if I'm really ready to go into the fight. That's one of the, that's a form of preparation technique, and I have definitely used that, as you guys have seen me preparing to go into the various Savages this tier. And so one of the problems with that is a lot of the uploaded VODs are these kind of group first VODs, and group first VODs can be incredibly sloppy. And so we don't know necessarily that it can or cannot target certain players or things like that, because they have not seen enough pulls. We ran it this many times and it always seemed to hit the tank. Well, that could just be statistical. Like, that could just be bad luck. And so you're like, oh, it always hits a tank. How do you know that? Well, we pulled 10 times and it only hit the 2 tanks. Like, that's not a big enough data set. And so when you see things like damage uptime optimizations where they're like, okay, you can pull it in and before the tether hits you can AoE, or if we position it in this way you can kind of skirt around this mechanic. Those are things that evolve as a fight matures, as you get into like weeks 2, 3, 4, and so on. Progression pulls are often very, very, very sloppy, because once it goes down, it goes down. And that is why when you watch World First races on WoW that make it past the weekly reset and they have to re-clear fights, it's not always just, well, they cleared it last week, so all the fights will just fall over, fall over, fall over, fall over. There is sometimes a little bit of reprog on harder fights if the way they got it down was, well, we got really lucky on that one, right? We had 3 people left up at the very end and it targeted the healer, and the 2 DPS were able to finish it. Well, this week it kills one of the DPS, you don't have enough DPS to clear it, and then it goes, you don't get the clear. Like, you can't always rely on these lucky kills. The world first race is about getting the boss down, not doing it well, not doing it correctly, like not doing it optimally, just doing it first.
at the middle circle. On one
Yeah,
side,
they
you
could.
were
Yeah,
not
they, about the
having-
middle circle apart, I think, was
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, what else is after this?
Oh yeah, the fun stuff that you first you underthought, then you overthought, and then you got it.
Yeah, so like the first pull we saw this, the fucking soccer ball pull, we were like, oh fuck, and then we all just like ran around to the soccer balls, and we obviously blew them up and died. And that was like underthinking, thinking they had nothing about them whatsoever. They just go away every single time, and you just avoid them. But the thing we didn't realize was that Shadow Reaver was breaking them. So it took us a little bit to real. It took us like 2 pulls, I think, to realize that it was just any raid damage whatsoever, or I guess a few specific. Most of the raid abilities would just pop them.
Yeah, anything that came directly from the boss.
Okay, and which is significant because the thing at the end of the fight doesn't pop them because it doesn't come from the boss. It's like from the edge of the room, right?
Yeah, when the swords come down and shoot those 3 lines
Correct,
from each
yeah.
one of them.
Yeah. So that's something we saw and figured out, and then we were overthinking it when it came to this next thing, which was the elephant, the beatific vision line across the room thing. And this righteous bolt we were doing as a tank mechanic we were literally just taunt swapping on the righteous bolt, giving you the vulnerability.
Yes,
And then we were using slurp or shirk, whatever it's called, on that every time. So that's kind of, I see what you mean now when you say that, like, shirk being a long CD is fine because most fights are designed around using that on cooldown, and it makes sense.
Yeah, so not only that, but when Shirk isn't available, you can just do swaps by toggling stance. And you guys figured
We were
that out
doing that,
later
yeah.
on.
We were
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that, and I forgot to turn it back on, and I was like,
Yeah,
Max has I all the time. And I was like, oh wait.
it's just a management thing that you need to learn to keep in the back of your mind while you're going. But the fact that you considered that eventually is a good sign, definitely.
I think the way we can do it now is just literally this simple. Like, we just when
Can't you make a macro?
Yeah,
to, like,
you
when
could probably
talk,
you could probably macro provoke and your tank stance together. So when you taunt, you instantly tank stance, and you just manually turn it off when the other tank taunts or something.
So the game doesn't tell you this, I don't mind telling you. You definitely want to put tank stance on before taunting, because tank stance gives a 10 times multiplier, and taunt itself gives 1,000 enmity. 1,000 potency worth of enmity. Of threat.
Oh,
So it's as if you've
Okay.
hit it with 10,000 potency to secure your lead.
so the macro would have to be tank stance into that, or does a macro not work?
It would be awkward to do that. You'd be spamming it, and depending on...
You'd have to build a delay in, and so like, and you miss. I think you're better off just managing it, especially players that are more than this capable. I understand what Max is going for here. Taunt can mean a couple of things in different games, and so when you have an enmity-based thing, right? You're talking about MMORPGs with the Holy Trinity present. Taunt over the years can work different ways. So when you're talking about threat generation, not all classes generate threat the same way in games. Sometimes you have enmity-based rotations on tanks. Oftentimes tanks have an enmity, or melee have an enmity advantage over ranged, so that if a ranged out DPSs a melee, the melee still takes priority, and that stops the boss from leashing. And that kind of imitates the logic that, like, why would the boss, if something's doing 1 more damage, why would it not attack the thing that's closer to it instead of running over to the thing that's doing just barely more damage? And so that kind of imitates that logic. And when you talk about taunt, you're talking about this kind of provoking of them to make them look at you. And sometimes that just jumps you to the top of the list +1. And the problem with that logic is what will happen is, let's say you have a tank that's at 1,000 enmity, and they're generating 100 enmity per second. And so they're at 1,000, now 1,100, now 1,200. And so when they hit 1,200, you hit taunt. You're now at 1,201. They cast another ability. They're at 1,300. They pass you again. And so you need them to know that the taunt is coming so that they don't pass you, and you need to press taunt plus something else, because you immediately need to be doing damage if that's exactly how taunt works, which is why taunt is, that plus something to give you a chance. It's not just taunt and then never touch it again. It's taunt and then do something. And then when you have things like tank stances, that's usually just an enmity multiplier. In Final Fantasy, at this point in Shadowbringers, what we've done with the enmity multiplier is we've set it to 10. it's freaking insane. And that is a new thing this expansion, where basically you push your tank stance on, you are now at 10 times enmity on everything you do, and then provoke is just a flat amount of enmity. And so I think threat is something that in Final Fantasy is so simple now that if you spend too much time thinking about it, you're more likely to cause yourself to screw up tank swaps, because those are the only two people really in the fight at all for enmity, because by the time the fight has been going for any amount of time, as an off tank, if they've had like a single rotation of their abilities with their stance on, they are so wildly far ahead of the top DPS and the healers that the only way to go back and forth is shirk and provoke, as well as somebody dropping stance. And when you see top end players, as a matter of fact, you will see a lot of times they don't really have stance on very much after early in the fight, outside of these swaps. So it's like stance is something that I notice it's not always on, because once you're ahead, it doesn't do anything else. It doesn't increase or decrease your damage. It doesn't increase or decrease your defensive capabilities, as opposed to stances as we're used to defining them on tanks in the past. It's not... calling it a stance kind of makes it sound more complex than it is, because usually stance is, hey, I'm going to give you this pro and trade for this con, and then maybe there's stance dancing, and you're going to jump between these stances that all do different things. No. It's literally, do you want 10 times enmity or do you not? And that's it.
Certain situations,
yeah,
the wrong one.
It's because the animation won't make it work. Yeah, I get it. Okay, so just every single time, I think we can just make it a system, right? Like if you get taunted off, you just always toggle off your tank thing, and then you just always toggle on. Anytime you're going to taunt, you just get used to tank stance taunt, and then that makes the most sense.
Most of the time as well, you can just turn it off for 15, 20 seconds and then turn it back on, and you should be fine. They should have established enough of a lead that without, damage downs or anything like that, you're not going to creep back up. But better safe than sorry.
Okay, cool. So
the biggest time to worry about taunt, for assuming that all players are identically geared and identical skill level, is at the beginning of the fight. The off tank at the beginning of the fight absolutely has to have stance off, and the main tank absolutely has to have it on, especially if the off tank is playing a class that is capable of more front end damage than the main tank. And so as a warrior, if I hit in a release and I have a very clean opener, I can pass other tanks early in the fight. And so if I have stance on, I will rip it off of them early in the fight. Now, if anybody's gone and looked at FF logs, warriors are not the top DPS, so I will get past at some point, but that point is in the future. And so what I have to do is I need to leave stance off, and then if I know there's coming up on a provoke, I can turn stance on. If I'm somebody who's struggling with kind of the APM of it all, I can turn stance on, and it's fine, and it can just sit on 10, 20, 30 seconds before the time that I need to provoke, and it's not going to do anything. It's not going to do anything until I add pressing provoke, and then, of course, shirk as that transition of threat takes effect.
So that's just the thing with the tank mechanic. And then this next part was one where so our initial thought was like, okay, we're definitely... So I had two thoughts here about how to do this better. One is legit actually making it a little bit safer by just sacking someone on top of one of them and just killing them on the thing and just rezzing them, and then everyone else being away from it, and then just using that as a safe spot for the charge. Obviously, you can do it without it. You can have, just like we did, the 2 people dodge, the next 2 people dodge, and then the light pillar does not break any of the things. You move it away from it, and then you just go to the safe spot here, which I went to. I think a few people missed here, actually. I think Cam's was way too far to the thing because you got hit by the
Yeah, I died. But we should have gone to the other side, I think, for uptime, I guess.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Like we should.
Who's over there? There's one person over there.
No, we should have done it. We should like where the boss went here. We go on the boss, and then we go just a little to the right. I mean, I don't think you would get that much uptime. You honestly either.
You
are
get
fine.
like a GCD.
Yeah, like literally 1 GCD. Yeah. So then after that, boss comes down. We get some reses out. What was that mechanic? Hold up.
That was the cone wing swords going out. They're gonna return, and it'll be with God Rays.
Oh, okay. I never realized that. So we ended up figuring out just from the the animation that it was always just going to repeat behind him. Did anyone else realize that the swords stayed on the edge of the room and that gave you some kind of indication that they were going to fire back at you?
No, I didn't.
I didn't realize that until this fucking second. Yeah, but I mean, it was fine because like you just had the reticle, but okay, that's cool. So we should pay attention to stuff like that.
But this camera angle is good for VOD review.
Yeah.
A lot of mechanics like that in the game.
Okay, so God Ray goes off. This was
Actually, so camera angle is the reason that ultimately when you guys kept telling me like I should try tanking, it's the reason that you guys got me to switch from Black Mage to tanking when I was making guides for work to game for normal mode clears on day one. Because on day one, to get the guides out, I was working a full-time job at the time. I just went full-time this January, and we've been doing this for 5 years. So the vast majority of time of work to game, I've had a full-time job. And to get the clears out fast, I needed to be able to pull the fight 2 to 3 times and then make the guide. And that means I needed clean footage. And so playing a class with a cleaner perspective is definitely something that helps you when you're going back and looking at it and you're like, okay, I know all the things that affected me, but as I make this guide, what are the things that affect all the other people? So I'm not just making a guide from my point of view. Like that footage needs to give you some indication, and like there are definitely people in the party that have cleaner views than others. And as a tank, since you're facing out on the room, as long as you have your camera angle set good so that you can see anything behind you, which you should do anyway, you now have the ability to see everything. And so when you're panning through different people's point of view, you will see that there are people that go, I never understand this fight. And then if you were to watch their footage, assuming it's recorded, you would see something like this, and there are no swords here, as opposed to there are swords on the other side. And so if this was the point of view we had, it's like, no, I understand why that mechanic confuses you, because you're not getting access to all of the information.
This was one where we found there was a little bit of safe spot, but I noticed that if you went far back, you had enough time to cycle into the little safe cone right here after these things went off.
Yes, you can actually 2-to-1 dodge, like into one as it explodes, if you don't have space on that side, but it's kind of spook.
Oh, okay. All right.
But yeah, God Rays are pretty straightforward to understand a bit.
Yeah. And then Shadow Reaver, let's see. Right, just pull another tank thing. Okay, so here was the weird Starbirth. Or no, this is not...
Yeah, we needed to aim with the beam, but I feel like you could just have used all your raid cooldowns and just take one of these at the end if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I guess that would be the pug strat.
Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Taking one of them gives everyone a damage down, right? And damage downs are bad. Usually they're like 50% damage down in this game. 25 or 50 is standard.
Yeah, from a distance, World of Warcraft, a lot of times like watching both, right, as a non-expert in both, one of the differences that you feel when you're watching World First Final Fantasy versus World First World of Warcraft is then World of Warcraft, a single death does not mean that the poll can't progress. It does not mean that they cannot get a clear, but their battle reses are limited. In Final Fantasy, you're seeing, oh, well, nobody's dying, and when people do die, you have these unlimited reses. Your healers can res, your red mages seem to have instant reses. Doesn't that make the game really easy? Well, you only have 8 people, and the way they'll tune it is they're like, yeah, we'll let you res and progress, but we'll track it through these damage downs. And actually, to make the more casual players more aware of this difference, because for the vast majority of the population, this is not something that they really deal with, because by the time they're in here, a couple of damage downs don't kill them because they're overgeared. The fight is very well documented. They're with people that are not making mistakes, so you're not seeing damage downs go out on all party members. It's just you as the new guy, while other people in your party are having more success. These damage downs don't necessarily affect the entire population in a way that it really matters, especially because a huge portion of the population has never seen a damage meter on how much damage they do. So there's a large number of people in this game that are getting through normals and extremes who don't know how much damage they do. They just know that they get clears. And so they're not necessarily aware of how big of a deal damage downs are. And I will say this expansion, one of the things they did to kind of teach us the importance of not taking downs is in Delibram, our relic-based raid. So think back to like the PvP raids in Wrath of the Lich King and imagine that those are tied to something like the Maw and your legendary. And so we're in these raids, and when you take one down, it does not actually give you a damage down, it gives you a warning, and if you get hit again while the warning is still up, it kills you. So we do have a res sickness here, this weakness, and then that gets worse on the second res, but then you have triple limit break that when used on a healer instantly brings up everybody without res sickness, so it just works differently. But these damage downs are a huge deal, and so when you have things like E9S, we were seeing people get further and further in fights, but they weren't any closer to a clear until they got the hang of doing it without taking damage modifiers.
So if you...
the vulnerability, right?
No, so there are vulnerabilities you get from failing stuff, but there are also damage downs, like as in you deal less damage.
Oh.
I didn't.
And so in a fight like this, that doesn't matter so much, right? Because, you know, the enrage is going to be a joke because it's an extreme trial. It's not made to be super well tuned or extremely punishing. But that, like, making that sort of strat a habit can really bite you in the ass when you go into, you know, more difficultly tuned fights. What you initially came up with was the way that it's done, with pulling it between two orbs and just shooting opposite. I don't think you ever executed it.
Yeah, that felt like the thing that made the most sense. So we did execute shooting the thing. What we didn't do is execute having the boss far away enough to where we don't actually get hit by it, I think.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So the boss needs to be like 5 yards closer and it would have been fine. But like we need to be.
Did we actually get that thing here on everyone that we like do less damage? Like,
I think I got hit by it and noticed it. Yeah.
Well,
You can see it. So what they're looking for is these little, they have a down marker, just like there's up markers for buffs. So it's like a square with an arrow attached to it, and it counts up. And you can stack it really high. So if you're in alliance raids and you're getting hit by things over and over, you can see it just go, oh, I got 2 damage downs. 3, 4. And Vuln works the same. It just means you're taking additional magic damage or additional physical damage or whatever. But it's the same idea. You're going to take a Vuln stack and a second Vuln stack and a third Vuln stack. And so your damage downs or Vulns, effectively they're the same thing. You did a bad and you shall now be punished. And so when you take 7, 8, 9 Vulns in an alliance raid, if you're not a tank and you get hit by anything, you're gonna die. If you are a tank, you pop cooldowns. If you're gonna get hit by anything else, you can just laugh as those Vuln stacks go higher and higher and higher. And as long as you don't die, you're only putting extra pressure on the healers. You're fine, kind of.
Multiple people did. Yeah, I stayed really close to the boss. I think I might have.
I do think alliance raids are only Vulns off the top of my head, but there could be damage downs. But it's the same idea. You've got a debuff on you because you did a bad.
Just missed it. No, I got hit too. Everyone got hit. So where's
the thing? But
where's
so
damage?
You see that red and purple debuff on Lumi on Urza. It's the second debuff in the list for Lumi and Urza.
Oh, the red and purple thing.
That's
the
the damage,
right there.
That's a generic damage down. That means
So are these Vulns and these damage downs? I just know bad is bad.
Whenever you see that, it generally means that you failed the mechanic.
Okay.
99% of the time.
Well, how come I didn't get it? Or I did.
Yeah,
yeah. It was just a tick.
There, they all got it. They literally all got it. Oh my gosh. Now it'll fall off, so you can see on the point of view here, you can see these countdowns. So you've got 25 seconds of it, and you got 55 seconds. These Vuln stacks here, if you get hit within that 55 seconds, it'll reset the counter, and then it'll up that to 4, and then it'll reset the timer. At the end of 55 seconds, all 3 stacks would fall off, is I believe how that works. So this is Vuln. This is the one I'm used to seeing in alliance raids when I'm not paying attention. This is damage. But they're both as the result of getting hit by something. There are times that could be, like, the Vulns I think can go out for some unavoidable stuff. I know there's, and then if you ever see a debuff that has a blue bar over it, that means that the healer can Itsuna that to pull it off. So just as debuffs in general, the UI is trying to tell them something, but they have not been playing the game to the point where they recognize, like, hey, this means I'm screwing up. If it has a blue bar, it means somebody else can fix it. Sometimes the screw up's not my fault, but I should definitely be evaluating my play. This one here, this third one, this is from getting resurrected. So that's a weakness, and that gives you, I think it's like 25% less stats or something like that. So it doesn't really matter how much it is. What matters is it's bad.
We move here for Shadow Reaver. Oh, so for the next 30 seconds, we were all doing fucking poop damage. And this is where I prop my living weapon. No.
Oh, so the game doesn't tell you this either, and this is why Dark Knight is sleeper OP. Your living shadow isn't affected by damage downs or weakness. So you can just chain in, summon your living weapon,
What?
shadow, and you still pop off.
Very good. This
Screw
guy, what do we do
that.
here? This is just another little dodge thing. And, oh, and these as well. So that's like a little different. I think this kills the shit out of someone as well. Yeah, it kills cams. And then we kill it. Wait, how much did that limit break do? Holy shit. Wait, boy, back up. Back the fuck up. Was this guy like 20%? 15%?
Didn't we already limit break? We already limit break. Didn't we?
Yeah, you LB'd.
It was before the laser beam. To break the
Oh, I
orb.
died. That's what happened. I didn't really... Wait, how did I die? It's probably something up. Did the boss just beat my fucking brains in?
So this is a threat issue there. You pulled threat.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah,
So
I...
because you have the lightning
Oh,
bomb,
yeah,
you're
the
getting
beam bomb.
slapped.
But
And you
Yeah.
got 3 Von stacks, so you're
Yeah, so lightning vuln and 3 vuln stacks.
taking a shit.
Yeah, I'm getting fucking out. Yeah. I added the
Your
floating...
aggro is so much stronger than mine. I don't know why.
I just...
It's so
Dude,
so
honestly,
just-
my damage went up by like...
reason-
My damage went up by like 50% today, too. I actually just like learned how to play my character for the first time.
The actual reason you took threat there is because your living shadow wasn't affected by the damage.
Oh, that actually makes
So
sense.
he was
Wait, oh,
pumping
your
full
living
threat
shadow
forward.
gives you...
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Even though it's a clone. Cool. But also, I feel like my damage today was much higher. Because I just actually
Oh,
figured out...
For the, it's a true statement for all of you, to be honest. Like, you had actual openers. It was crazy.
Yeah. Alright.
If you were to pause right now, though, you'll see the timers are a little misaligned. Like, Embolden came up.
So we'll say now you have a tank with a weakness. So for the next minute, what you would do, just for anybody that hasn't done a lot of like 8-man tanking, is you're gonna let the off tank. So a lot of times, like the off tank and the tank, one of the things that I'm having to adjust to is I get into Savage. I don't play at nearly the level of Sphia or Limit. These guys are probably already better at Final Fantasy than I am. Is that there's a tank swap that happens here, and so the off tank needs to know all the positioning because they're now in charge. And at least until this falls off, because you're not going to want to sit there with a vuln stack and weakness taking the hits. You're just putting undue pressure on healers.
5-6 seconds ago. So you've
What
pushed
does
things
what does
out of sync a
embolden
little
mean?
bit.
What does embolden
Embolden
mean?
is the
Michael.
the rightmost one on your offensive buffs
Mhm.
party buffs list. So the objective is to keep the one on the far right, the one on the far left, and the one in the middle all synced up. Actually, the 2 on the left, all 3 on the left and the one on the right are all going to be 2 minutes,
did it
except the one
track
in the middle,
those?
which is a 60. It's
Those are
not
all-
important in a fight like this.
Yeah,
They
Go ahead.
will become really, really important as you go forward.
yeah, because there's gonna be damage checks for sure with our gear. But so what those are, the things I have above my party frames are, so to the left of my party frames are each individual person's CDs, like defensive CDs. So you see purple bubble, octopus bubbles near the bottom for Cams and Nagura. I'm working with the add-on developer or the UI developer. He's gonna make it spaced out to where it actually reaches, but you can see that the party frames are a little bit bigger than the actual like things. But and then on top, those are all
So of course they come in and they immediately use a bunch of add-ons.
of our damage cooldowns. So like he said, the 2 on the left, the 3 on the left, and the 1 on the right are all 2 minutes, and we should always have synced. And you guys should know.
I wondered why like Adel was here. I was like, I don't understand what's happening. But I don't. All right,
When those are about to happen, just every 2 minutes, and then that's when you fucking pop.
isn't that
So
Adel?
you
I feel
blast.
like everyone kind of needs to track those, but you need to have this like.
And why you had like reprisal on there twice, but that's just tracking. That's a cooldown tracker.
Why everyone? This is not like something.
I
more
don't
simple, 'cause
think
I only want to see the. damage
Well, I
cooldowns
mean,
that
first of all,
have
you
to
could download this UI, uncheck every single thing except for that, and it's literally pre-configured to show up like that. It would take 2 seconds. Those things are already, you don't have to add anything. But also, it kind of happens naturally. Like, if everyone just uses them on cooldown until we actually talk about holding them for something, I don't think it's
Yeah,
a
but
problem. Because there's like a
someone
ton
might-
of people in this game actually know that they're going to be pressed at certain times, and they just know that. You don't need to track them. It's just like we, as like WoW players, are trained to think min-maxing like that, right? Like you just, that's why you think you need to have it. It's just what we're used to. Okay, and then we killed this guy. How much longer does this boss go before we blow up?
I think there's still another mechanic set or two. Same thing with Titania, right? You guys are overgeared. This was more about the personal responsibility.
Okay.
That's why I think this was a good fight for you guys. And less the puzzle, more the not standing in bed, understanding a couple of tells that you hadn't seen before.
Is this boss widely considered to be way fucking easier than the previous one, or were we just super new to the game?
Not way easier, but easier.
I can tell you from all of us,
it's less punishing.
bro, I can tell you from all of us that we felt like that previous boss we did was at least 10 times harder than this. Like,
It feels like the
But I
previous
think it's
boss
because
had
we
a lot
don't
more white
understand the
mechanics,
mechanics.
right?
yeah, we just didn't understand.
It's the level of punishment is different between the two. This one just gives you a ton of vulnerabilities. Titania would straight kill you in a lot of places.
Also, I feel like Titania had more like Final Fantasy mechanics. That makes sense. That we have no clue what like they do. But if you play the game for like years, you would know like, oh, so this is happening.
Yeah, this boss seemed like incredibly easy, like super fucking easy.
Yeah, you went through it pretty quickly. I will say, from watching it, it felt like you overthought, but you don't know how much you should be, how cerebral. You should try to be about these fights right now.
The overthinking thing, I'm not worried about at all because we have literally no gauge as to what normally under or overthinking is in this game, right? We're just basically guessing. So.
Oh, absolutely. And the biggest problem is that the amount that you're going to need to think about things is going to be very different based on the content that you're doing. Like, this is an extreme trial, so you don't know where that bar is right now.
Super cool. Super neat to see people that play at that level. I'm sure in a matter of hours they are closing up skill levels that take me, weeks or months of practice to build, which is why they're the best. So it's definitely interesting to see Max and kind of hear their team think about this and the way they're progressing. My understanding is now they are in Eden Savage, and I think they're working on Eden 3 is what people said as of the time of this recording. So they are moving their way through the Savages, and I believe that they've been provided with gear that was appropriate for each of the level ranges. So they're doing it not synced, I don't think. I think they're literally doing it in the correct gear. So I think they've been literally handed 450 whatever, and so they did, it sounds like, Titania first, and then they're doing Innocence, and so I don't know how far they went into like Sorrows of War Lit or anything like that, or if they went straight for Eden. I don't know if they're doing them in the order they released or in the order that's been fed to them, or just whatever they freaking feel like. Obviously they can do whatever they want, but I think it's awesome to see people go through this. One of the cool things about this game is because of the way syncing works, because of the way minimum item level works, because of the way echo works, you have an opportunity to go back and clear a fight for a mount after it's, 2 expansions old, and you can just solo it. And you have the ability to go back and have it crush your face in. Not for extra loot, not for extra rewards, just because you want it to. And so you have this ability to scale the content to exactly what you want. You want to do it blind, do it blind. You want to do it the easiest way and build your way up, do it that way. And so one of the things that I think will be really neat about people coming in this late at their skill level is these are people who have seen all these WoW raids when they're relevant. And if you haven't, if you just started raiding WoW Mythic this tier, you don't get to go back and experience the previous tiers as they were really at all. There isn't any way to do it in a truly respectful way, as opposed to, you could try equipping like the right level gear and freezing your experience, but because they let you bring your full kit and all that, like it just never quite works. But because of syncing in minimum item level, we have built in a punishing version that is intended to stick around. So you would be bending the way WoW works to try to recreate past raids, as opposed to Final Fantasy is planned for this. That is baked in. It is a setting you hit in the Duty Finder, and it just handles it. So you can be a max level character in best in slot gear, and you can be progressing through minimum item level old world fights anytime you want. And so that gives them a chance to see that. Now, if there were nerfs or adjustments in the way the mechanics work, they're still there. Of course, if there's classes in the game that didn't exist back then, you're getting to play those classes at that level range, and they didn't exist. We have pruned abilities over the years, so there are various abilities that used to be on the bar that are not, and so there are things that have changed over the years, and so as a result, not every fight ages perfectly, but it is their intent, especially with ultimates, which are not allowed to be done unsynced, where you go in overpowered and just blast it down. It is there to protect the fight. And so you have to go back and and take them down. And so that keeps a level of respect for the content that I think will be really neat with them coming in so late, because it opens up all of this past content if in between WoW tiers they want to come knock out Final Fantasy tiers and they have happened to have already beaten whatever's current at the time. There's a backlog of stuff that will take them at least a reasonable amount of time to get through, give or take how many clears it gets. My understanding is that like Asmongold did mid-item level no echo 3 of 4 fights in like 1 day. So it's possible that Limit, it's not that long, but you know, it would at least use some of their time, kinda.